Good day everyone, Miloa here. Today I am trying something slightly different. I will be talking about the LOTRO strategy video for Radarrig Sagroth Boss 2, walking you through how all the mechanics work of that fight, and then suggesting one or two solutions. So sit tight and let's get going here. Today is going to be a live stream as opposed to the um, typical pre-shot videos that I do, just because I want to actually have a little bit more fluidity and share with you how all of this works. Alright, so this is a strategy sheet that I've put together. I'll be putting the link to the sheet in the description below. It contains all of the strategies that you need to know. And so we are going to be looking at each of these mechanics, and then I will be walking you through some actual footage of a boss fight, my first clear that I got over this weekend, and show you the strategy that we used. Now, first of all, this is the arena that you have for Sagroth, the Radarrig. You enter at quadrant 2, and I've labeled the quadrants 1, 2, 3, 4 based on the locations of where the puddles fill in. So you need to realize that at 80% of boss's health, this entire quadrant is going to fill with an infectious puddle, and that puddle does 20% morale damage every 3 seconds, so you want to get out of it real quick. At 60% of boss's health, quadrant 2 will fill, and quadrant 1 will stay filled, and at 40%, you'll have quadrant 3 filled as well, which would only leave you quadrant 4 at the last end of the boss fight to be able to have room to move. There is no enraged timer on this fight. However, the longer the fight goes, the more challenging it gets because of everything that's going on in this fight. So the basic strategy is, oh, and one more thing, at 30 seconds, you're gonna have the robust vermin and the ferocious vermin spawn. It's different from the boss's health. So not only do you need to track the boss's health, you also need to have a timer up looking for those 30 seconds so that you know exactly when they're going to spawn. Okay, so just the very high overview strategy. What you want to do is you want to kill the robust, you want to mez the ferocious, you want to stop AoE after they spawn so that there's no chance of somebody waking up the ferocious. Then you want to move through the quadrants 1, 2, 3, 4, or maybe you just want to stay in 3 or you just want to stay in 4. It depends on your group's decisions on how they want to do it, but you want to stay out of those big puddles. And then you want to cycle through your AoE, CZs, and interrupts to keep the tiny vermin interrupted. Now, I will let you know, there are multiple strategies out there that I've seen. There are some groups that just stay right here on the center and just kind of go from 1, 2, 3, 4, like in this very tight location, and just blow everything up. I have seen groups only working in quadrant 3 and then at the very end moving to quadrant 4. I have seen groups start off in quadrant 1 and move from 1, 2, 3, and 4. I have seen groups, everybody, all the hunter DPS stands in quadrant 4 and the tank kite around like crazy. I have seen so many different iterations of this fight. It is insane. I have watched videos, I have played through some of these. The strategy that I'm going to share with you is one that my group found to work. I don't think that there's a right or a wrong. It's just whatever works for your group. I have also seen groups that will kite initially and then they'll stand and tank. I've seen groups that stand and tank and then kite. Like I say, there are multiple ways to skin this cat, so I'm not going to belabor this point anymore. I am just going to share with you the mechanics of the fight, and then I'm going to share with you one solution that my group found to work for us. Okay? Now, with that said, let's go ahead and jump in. Firstly, I want to talk about the robust vermin. Okay? The robust vermin is going to do a debuff. it's gonna have this yellow bar induction. It is called Restore Morale. Now, what Restore Morale does is just what it sounds like. It's gonna heal the boss all the way up to full health. And if, therefore, right, if the robust stays alive and gets that induction off, what that means is that the boss will continuously heal and you'll be in there in perpetual or until everybody dies. Okay, so the strategy here is to kill the robust. Yes, you can chance having an LM dual as both the robust and the ferocious, but that can be problematic. For example, if your LM happens to go down, what do you do then, right? It's just a safety measure, in my opinion, and best practice to just take the robust out of the picture completely and thus not having to worry about him at all. So it's safest to kill him first. Next, you have the ferocious vermin. What the ferocious vermin does is this yellow bar induction called bolster strength, and on tier 2 it multiplies the boss's outgoing damage by 1.3 for 1 minute. So the ferocious is not as big of a deal, but he will make the boss do more damage. That could potentially make it much harder for your healers to be able to help with group survivability and stability throughout the entire fight. So you want to keep the ferocious alive simply because if the ferocious dies, then at any point in the instance, the boss can summon both of them back, and then you have to deal with them again. Versus if you just keep the ferocious alive, keep him permamezzed out of the fight, and everybody single target the boss, it is much safer that way, and you don't have to deal with the robust coming back alive and having to deal with the robust again. Now, I do want to point out that the amount of damage that the robust and the ferocious does to an individual player is actually very small. It's not that big of a deal. So I, as a hunter with my mitigations capped on tier 5, I was totally able to just stand there and tank the boss. No problems whatsoever. And be able to do that. Hey Evil, yes, I also play Lord of the Rings online, not just Star Wars, so this is for all my Lord of the Rings fans. And this is one of the most recent raids, 6-person fellowships that we've had that have dropped that I'm walking through today. Okay, so next, tiny vermin. The tiny vermin, there's usually 4 of them that spawn, and they get summoned by the boss, and it's completely random as to when this happens. And they do an induction that is called, hang on, it's called Spread Plague, that you can see down here. Now, when Spread Plague, it takes like 3-4 seconds for it to go off. It feels a lot quicker like that in the fight. But once it goes off, you have 2 seconds to move away from them. If you don't move away from them, you will get these 2 debuffs. Infectious Puddle, which will subtract 25% maximum morale every 3 seconds while you're in the puddle, and they'll also put a slow on you. So they'll make you slow so that you can't get out of those puddles quickly, and once 3 or 4 of them drop on you at the same time, right, it magnifies and it stacks, so it's an insta-kill. Thus, if you see the tiny vermin doing their induction, there's one of 2 things that need to happen. You either need to stun them or daze them, okay, interrupt them so that they're unable to get that induction off, or what you need to do is able to move away from them. So you've got one of those 2 options at your disposal. If you're going to go the AoE, CC, and interrupt method, you need to discuss before the actual fight starts who's going to do it when. because the CC cooldowns for some are 30 seconds, for some are 3 seconds, for some are 5 seconds, some are single target, some are AoE. You want to really coordinate those AoE, CCs, and interrupts so that you can get the tiny vermin under control. Now, obviously, it's going to be a lot easier to do that if the tiny vermin are grouped up on the boss, and the only way to have that happen is for every single player to be grouped up on the boss, because the tiny vermin will spawn underneath the feet of a random player. Okay, so if you're going to do the stand and tank method, you definitely want to make sure that your group knows the CC rotation. You know who's gonna do what when. If you've dazed them, they have a daze immunity for a couple of seconds before you can apply the next daze. So you want to make sure that you talk that through with your group. Everybody knows when they're supposed to go, what skill they're supposed to use, and really coordinate it. So, because that is so challenging sometimes to coordinate, a lot of groups have moved towards the kiting method as opposed to the stacking method. The reason being, with a kiting method, if you keep the boss moving throughout the arena, the boss doesn't have time to stop and do some of the mechanics, like summoning the vermin, like infection. All of those are way less. They can still go off, and you still have to have a mechanism to deal with them, but it's far less that you have to deal with. So there's pros and cons, right, to each of these methods. It's what works best for your team. Okay, now let's take a look at what happens. What are some actual mechanics that the boss does, not his ads? So the first one is blighted. Hang on. Blighted Bite is what it's called. Not Blighted Blight. I mistyped that. Blighted Bite is a wound that the boss applies. It has it decreases outgoing damage, it reduces incoming healing, and it does drops a puddle. Now, the trick with Blighting Blight is that once you cleanse, it's gonna drop a 5-meter puddle, and that puddle is going to do initial damage on application of anyone that's standing next to that player. So once again, if you're doing the grouped up method, everybody is grouped up on a tight ball within 5 meters of the boss. If you get that wound on you, you have to move out of group. Once you move out of group, you gotta wait a little bit to heal up, and then you can cleanse it and then come back into the group. You do not want to use group cleanses in this fight. Reason being that group cleanses can cause these puddles to drop in places that are not good and can cause a lot of damage. So people want to cleanse themselves unless they're specifically asking for help. The next skill that the boss does is called Tail Whip. Alright? It's yellow bar induction, so it can be interrupted. It is an AoE damage that the boss does. I believe it's not a frontal damage, it's a backwards damage. And it is huge, and it can one-shot light and medium armor if they do not have their mitts all the way up. Now, with the tail whip, once again, we're talking about two strategies here, right? If you're doing the standing in one spot tanking location, you want to have the guardian be responsible for interrupting that tail whip. If you're doing the kiting method where the tank is running all over the place, the tank cannot do the interrupt. It falls then to one of the DPSers, such as a hunter, champ, warden, to do that interrupt. Now, I do want to point a note here that with the kiting method, one person is running around the room like crazy, trying to maintain aggro and keep the boss entertained. However, that does mean that you lose the DPS, the interrupts, the heals, all of the contributions that that single player can bring to the table during the fight. So it's a toss up, really, whether you have somebody kite versus standing still. But it is different requirements that will need to be met by the rest of the group depending on the strategy followed. Okay, enough about that. Next, let's talk about Vicious Slash. Now, Vicious Slash is a debuff, it looks like this, that is applied to the tank. And it increases the tank's incoming damage, and it is a wound. You really do not want to cleanse this. I don't know that it is cleansable, but the boss will just keep reapplying it. So you may as well just ignore it. Your tank's gonna hurt, you're gonna have to heal your tank. Comes down to the healers to take care of it. Next is On Guard. It is linked to damage. It is a corruption that is on the boss that reduces its incoming damage. Now, if On Guard is on tier 5, it can go up to stack up to 24, meaning with a minus 60% incoming damage. And you can keep it on and keep damaging the boss and just ignore it, but the boss goes down a lot quicker if the corruption is removed. The only downside is if the corruption is completely removed and and Vicious Slash is removed from the tank, there is a chance that the boss can reapply both of them. Okay, so if you have high enough DPS, you gotta determine what your strategy is going to be about corruptions. I just think in today, the average player, they're just used to doing corruption removal at this stage, and so telling them not to do corruption removal removes one of their potential damage skills out of their rotation and can actually cause the fight to go longer. So I'm all for removing corruptions and just getting it done and then just blowing the boss up once he is corruption free. Clinging Plague. Now, Clinging Plague is a gray bar induction. It's a gray bar induction. The boss will stand there and induct it, and it subtracts 10% of your maximum morale. It will do so every 3 seconds, and it can stack. Okay, so when it stacks up to 5, it's doing 50% maximum morale damage every 3 seconds. There's no way a healer can heal through it. So what do? In the center of each of these quadrants, 1, 2, 3, and 4, you will see that there is a cleansing device. You want to click on that cleansing device, and everybody needs to dip in and dip out of it, including the tank. So you need to predetermine with your group when are you going to do that, so that everybody knows when they need to be in that cleansing device. And the cleansing device is only active for, I don't really know how long. All I know is it always feels short. Too short to be able to really get in there and do it. So be sure that you talk about who's doing it and when are you doing it. The last mechanic that the boss does is called Infection, and he will put a yellow eye over a player's head. And what this does is once Infection goes off, it will do a lot of initial damage on the player and anybody standing next to that player. So whoever has the Infection yellow eye on them needs to move away from the group. Now, there are a couple of options on how to deal with this, right? Number 1, to avoid an infection, everybody can stay grouped up on the boss within a 5-meter range. Then nobody will get infection. Okay, so that's option 1. However, that takes extremely high coordination and everybody being aware of positioning. If your group is having trouble doing that, you may want to change up your strategy. Option 2 would be to deliberately have one person stand further away that have the mitigations and that can take that hit from the yellow eye from that infection, and then once that goes off they come back in. Some groups that have followed that strategy leave that up to the lore master, since the lore master has to be out in the middle anyways to mez and take care of the robust and the ferocious. They just make sure the LM has the mitigations to handle that hit, parks the LM out there, and everybody else just moves around and do what needs to be done. Option number 3 is that you can actually cleanse that eye by using the cleansing device. I tested that out over this weekend and it actually does work. But the problem with using the cleansing device for that is that the cleansing device takes a while for it to reset before you can use it again. So since the eye randomly gets applied, it can be very difficult to be able to reach one of those cleansing devices, get them activated in time before that goes off. So what this means is when the boss is doing the infection gray bar induction, the person with the yellow eye has to call it out, and the healer or healers need to pump all the heals into that player to get them fully healed, so that when induction goes off, they don't die. Because you can have all the mitigations in the world, but if your morale is low, you're still going to die from the infection. So that is how I would do that. The last option, which also works, okay, is if the say the boss is over here, the further you can actually run away from the boss with the yellow eye, and when you get out of range from the boss, the yellow eye goes off, you won't take any damage because you're not in the zone of effect from the boss. So I've shared with you a couple of strategies of how to deal with infection, and it all just depends on what your group decides and how your group wants to do this. Now I want to pause here. I want to say that personally, in my opinion, I think that SSG did a tremendous job when they created this boss fight, because there are so many different ways in which to accomplish this fight, and that to me makes this fight a lot of fun. It also at times makes it very frustrating because different groups and different people have different ways of doing it, and as a community I don't think we have all settled on a method to do it, and it is very hard to settle on a single method to do it because of all the variability that is built into this fight and into this boss. And because it's so highly variable, makes it very difficult and challenging to find a single solution in order to do this. This fight really tests people's ability to manage their own debuffs, manage their buffs, be positionally aware, and also be communicating and doing maximum damage. And it can be very stressful and very fun. And if done right, this fight can be done in 2 minutes. Now what we're going to do next is I am actually going to show you the clear that I got over the weekend. And I'm just going to walk you through this fight and how we did. Now, here we are starting. Here I am stealth. Alright, so what we have here, let me first talk about group comp here. We went with a champ as the tank, because champs have a much longer duration for kiting, and we had deliberately decided that we were going to do the kiting method. We went with the healing bear because of the rush that it can give to the champ, and between the two of them they can keep the champ up with kiting 95% of the time. So that's a great combination to have. We went with the Berg for mezzing. You could also have gone with an LM. It doesn't really matter. Either of them would work. And then we had 3 DPSers, 3 hunters to take out the boss. Now you can see we are positioned here on the east side. Our tank is standing here and the boss is going to be in the middle. And you're going to see our Berg is going to run into here, trigger the boss, and then circle back. The tank is going to pull the boss and then start kiting. The reasoning behind this is that we don't want the boss to be able to get Vicious Slash off on the tank. Because once Vicious Slash is applied to the tank, then the boss also gets on guard and becomes much harder to kill the boss. So you can see here our tank is starting to kite around the room. The boss doesn't have the on guard debuff. You can see him taking quite a lot of damage there, and we are just kiting at this stage. Right about here at 80%, you're going to see quadrant 1. You can see over there, the tiny vermin has spawned right on the cleansing device because nobody was standing in that quadrant. And you're going to see right there, the big infectious puddle dropped for that entire space. Our tank is still kiting. The rat still hasn't caught up to our tank, so we're still good at this point. You will also note that we've already burned him down to 72% and only 22 seconds has passed in the fight. We're gonna keep... So I'm the target assist, so I'm sitting here watching this clock, and I'm gonna wait for it about 28 seconds, and then I'm gonna start getting ready for the robust and the ferocious to spawn. Right here, the robust and ferocious spawn, you can see our Berg has already moved into position, ready to mess that ferocious, while I take out the robust. So I target the robust, and I start killing it. The ferocious got loose there, but he's gonna get messed. Oh, you might have missed it, but I interrupted the robust from getting the morale heal off. Right now, I am here tanking the robust. That is totally normal and totally fine for that to happen. The champ hasn't had time yet to pick up that aggro, nor is he going to, because the robust itself does very little damage, and me with my mids, I should be totally able to take it. And the Berg actually messed the robust here as well to give us a little bit of breathing room, and you're gonna see the robust is gonna just die real quick. The ferocious is loose. We try to keep the ferocious mess, but if he gets loose, that's fine. The Berg just stays on him, interrupts him, and keeps mezzing him. We also just decided just to go AoE so that we didn't have to worry about that. Now, right after the robust dies, we run to the cleansing device because our this debuff here, Clinging Plague, has had sufficient enough time to tear up that we need to go take care of it. We're almost into a minute now. I should point out this is tier 5. So we're gonna hit the cleansing device. Everybody's gonna come dip in and out. Just want to point out the boss still doesn't have on guard on him and still chasing the champ. And we're just gonna sit here and we're gonna burn down the boss until about 43%, and then we're gonna move. The ferocious is still up and still roaming, it's okay. Here's the tail whip that I was talking about. The tank obviously cannot get tail whip because he's kiting around the room, nor do we want the rat boss to catch him, so it falls to one of the hunters to interrupt him. And you can see this champ at 42%. We're moving to the last quadrant, right? Because we've now already had quadrant 1, 2, and 3 fill. We only have quadrant 4 available to us. We move into quadrant 4. The champ is still kiting around 3. When we moved into there, we decided, okay, it's good. We're gonna use the cleansing device pretty soon. So everybody just group up there. I hit it. Everybody dips in and out. The boss is still tanking. I kind of like to move to the corner here so that I do not have to constantly turn in a circle and lose time to do my damage. Oh, here you can see, right, the boss finally caught the champ. The boss now has on guard on him, and the champ has this vicious slash on him. And now you'll see the boss health will stay at about 38% until we're able to get all of that out. Now here we could have gone to the stand and tank method if we wanted to, but our champ decided to continue kiting. Reason being that if the boss stands still, he will have time to get some other skills off. That was a very poor Bulbalor. Got a strong hit there. Alright, so right now, you'll see down here, the tiny vermin are inducting, and I have a choice. I can either try and interrupt them, or I can keep shooting the boss. We're already 2 minutes into this fight, which is considered a little bit long for this fight. And so, but I decided to stay on the boss and just sidestep the tiny vermin, allowing the tank to pick them up. There's the puddles to the drop. You can see I've got 3 on me, and so I know I've got to move. I should have really moved a little bit earlier, but I didn't. I still survived. And so now the tiny vermin and the boss is following the champ. And he's having to kite very tight circles at this point because he doesn't have a lot of room to move. You do not want to kite through any of the puddles because then the champ will start getting the plague. You can see his morale is pretty low right here. Gets a heal. We finally was able to get the corruption off the boss, and now he's taking damage again. Boss is inducting clinging plague. And you can see while he's doing clinging plague, obviously he's standing still. And so whoever is kiting this needs to keep the boss targeted to see when that goes off so that the timing can work out for the kiting. And we won. Now, I will tell you that that was after doing this fight for an hour and a half, trying to figure out exactly how we were going to do this and what our strategies were going to be. Like I said, there's multiple ways to do this, and I would encourage you to find a method that works for your group and then just farm the crud out of it. So, happy hunting, and thanks for dropping in today. Good night.